What if Babymetal was a 1980s city pop band? This week on What If, How and Why, we'll be discussing how Babymetal's unique sound is built on a foundation of unlikely hybrids and seemingly paradoxical juxtapositions. And we'll also be looking at the city pop genre, a style seemingly far removed from what Babymetal does, but maybe we'll find that the two have more in common than we previously thought. Hi, my name is Morgan Brown, and every Monday I upload a new What If video to my YouTube channel. The idea of these being that each week I pick a different popular song and imagine an alternative universe in which a change of circumstances causes that to come out completely different from the version that we know and love. I then take the original lead vocal of that and record a new backing track to it to bring this alternative universe version of the song to life. And then on Wednesdays, I record one of these companion videos to discuss related themes to that video and also share some insights into how I went about creating this alternative universe version of the song. So the song I picked this week was Akatsuki by Babymetal, and I tried to reimagine that as a 1980s city pop song. So if you haven't had a chance to listen to that yet, here's a little taster. Had so many worries going into this about doing this track. The first of which, and not the least, is that I know Amuse are famously strict on copyright with YouTube people. So if you're watching this, hopefully it's a sign that Cobra hasn't sent someone round to kick my door in yet, but fingers crossed I'm able to keep this up. We'll see how we go. But more importantly, I was worried about song choice. I've wanted to do something with city pop for a little while since I kind of really discovered the genre, and I knew if I wanted to turn a song into city pop, it had to be by a Japanese artist, because it just wouldn't sound like city pop without at least a bit of the Japanese language in there, I don't think. And then obviously, as I started thinking about Babymetal for the Kawaii Metal project that I did a few weeks ago, it occurred to me that they'd be the obvious choice for this. My initial instinct was to pick one of their lighter, more kind of frivolous songs, something that fans wouldn't be too upset if I messed around with it a little bit. So initially I was thinking of something like Da Da Dance, something that's relatively fun and frothy that people enjoy but don't necessarily have a massive emotional kind of connection to. Unfortunately, Babymetal don't have any officially released studio acapellas. You can't just get an isolated vocal track ready to use online. And my stem splitter program that I've got could not separate Sue's vocal from any of the Babymetal studio tracks. They're just too densely produced. So my only other recourse if I wanted to do a Babymetal song was to use one of the tracks that they've done a much more stripped down version of. Now, there are only 3 of these to the best of my knowledge. They've done stripped back piano versions of The One, Monochrome, and Akatsuki. The One was right out because it's in 6/8 time, which just doesn't sound very city pop. So it came down to Akatsuki, the unfinished version as it's called, and Monochrome. And they're both songs that I know Babymetal fans feel extremely passionate about, with good reason. They're both great songs that people are really emotionally invested in. In the balance, I thought Akatsuki of the two probably sounded most malleable into city pop, so I went for that. But please believe me that I mean no disrespect whatsoever to Babymetal by changing this song. I just wanted to show that the song and Sue's vocal have a kind of universal quality that makes them work in multiple different settings. Just wanted to make that clear before we start. But yeah, when I did my thing on Kawaii Metal a few weeks ago, I did talk a little bit about Babymetal, talking about their origins, how the idea of Kawaii Metal originated, and just kind of talking about the early days up to the Sonisphere Festival performance in 2014. And I could just carry on telling this story in this video, but to be honest, there are enough really good guides on the internet already that you don't need me and my unscripted ramblings kind of repeating that story again if you want to know it. What I thought I'd do instead today is just talk a little bit about how I eventually came to the realization that I liked Babymetal, and then talk about one of the things that I most like about them. Because I was pretty slow to cotton on to them. I mean, I initially heard them pretty early on when the Gimme Chocolate music video went viral, and it was quite polarizing at the time, that video. Some people, like metal diehards, absolutely hated it. Some people immediately loved it. I thought it was loads of fun. I definitely enjoyed it, but I think the choice of that song as the breakout video was kind of both a curse and a blessing, because it is really fun. It's very accessible. It really emphasizes the kawaii aspect of the band, but also has those heavy riffs, and it's got a universal topic: everyone likes chocolate. But at the same time, it's very far from being one of their more substantial songs, and it does kind of present them in a way that became really easily memeified, I think. So rather than people taking them seriously as a band, they immediately became that band that does the Daft Chocolate song. I didn't necessarily feel so much like that about them, but it didn't really have enough substance to particularly make me want to go and check out too much more that they'd done. So I kind of heard that and then moved on with my life. I follow various rock and metal news sites on social media, so I'd occasionally see just stories popping up about them. So I was aware that, you know, they were carrying on, their following was growing, they were releasing records, and, you know, figured good for them, but wasn't really paying any attention to the music. It wasn't until summer of last year, for whatever reason, on my YouTube feed, they kept suggesting this new video, Ratatata by Babymetal and Electric Callboy. I'd never heard of Electric Callboy, hadn't heard Babymetal for 10 years, and I ignored it for a while, but then after a bit, curiosity just got the better of me. Bored one day, give it a little click, and it was fantastic. If you haven't heard it, go and check it out. It's such a fun song, tremendous music video, just hilarious, and it was pretty much the song of the summer, I think, for me and for a lot of people. So then, after that, they've been, for this most recent album, doing a series of collaborations, so those started popping up. I think a little bit after that, you get the one with Poppy, so watch that, that was tremendous. Then the one with Slaughter to Prevail, song 3 popped up, that was mind-blowing, absolutely great. And at this point, I'm starting to realise maybe I do actually really like Babymetal. Possibly I should go and check out some of the stuff that I've missed out on in this intervening decade. So I did just sort of have a bit of a mooch back through and gradually discover a bit more of the breadth of the kind of material they've been doing for all this time. And it was a real eye-opener, because I think, like a lot of people, just seeing that one song back in 2014 gives you a pretty narrow idea of what they do. And when you actually just delve a little bit deeper, you immediately discover that there's so much more to them than just this sort of one very simplistic idea of them. One of the things that I really like about them is just the fascinating level of hybridity that goes into their music. Obviously, on a basic level, the thing that everyone knows about them is that the fundamental hybrid that creates Babymetal is heavy metal and J-pop. Those two things together create Babymetal. And even on that level, that's really appealing to me, because I've always been someone who, from a really early age, enjoys both over-the-top twiddly heavy metal and fun girl group pop with dance routines. So the idea of taking J-pop idol group music and combining it with metal is a great one, a concept that was really appealing to me from the off. I think what they've always done particularly well is, where people have tried to combine pop and metal previously, they always do it by watering down both elements. So in the 80s you get pop metal stuff, but it's like, oh well, we'll keep the guitars, but we'll make them a bit less heavy, and we'll throw in some more keyboards, soften things up a bit, and we'll have some pop elements, but we'll try and toughen the pop up a bit, sing in a bit of a gravelly voice and just make it a bit tougher. So you end up with this much more kind of middle of the road product. Yeah, I can enjoy a bit of soft rock as much as the next person, but it's a compromise, whereas Babymetal has always been sort of uniquely uncompromising. The pop bits are really poppy, and the heavy bits are really heavy, and there's no watering down of either, and I kind of love that. So that's the basic dichotomy of Babymetal, but the moment you start to look a bit more at them, you realise that it's not that simple. There's a lot more going on there. For a start, in terms of the metal that they're bringing to the equation, you're not just talking one style of metal. They haven't just gone, okay, well, we'll take thrash metal and combine it with pop. The moment you dig into their back catalogue, you realise that they're really sort of ransacking the entirety of metal history to bring all these different sounds into the mix. So you might have some kind of Limp Bizkit Biscuit style rap metal 1 minute, combined with this shredding high-speed Dragon Force power metal, old school 80s thrash, butting heads with something that sounds like late 90s new metal. So they'll take from and reference all areas of metal, but in a way that, although it can be quite cheekily referential, it never feels like a parody, it never feels like a dumbing down or a watering down. Whatever they're diving into, it feels like they're doing it with real reverence for that style. So there's a total mix of metal styles going on, but then they're rarely just combining that with just kind of straight J-pop. I mean, there's a certain amount of that going on. Obviously, if you go back to their first single, Doki Doki Morning, you couldn't get more J-pop than that. Super cutesy, super kawaii pop. But then the further you listen, the more different styles you hear them mixing in. So you might have a burst of ska out of nowhere. There's some kind of almost like Ricky Martin style Latin pop salsa vibes going on, or banging kind of Euro house mixed in with these crushing metal riffs. Next thing you know, they'll be referencing Bollywood or Bhangra, or even various hip hop styles. They've done things that have hints of drum and bass in there. So they're really just cheerfully plundering pretty much the entire history of popular music just to find elements that they can combine together in really interesting ways. And in a way, it makes them sort of the ultimate postmodern rock group, but without the cynicism that implies, I think. It's the kind of thing that if a Western group did it, I feel like it would all be overlaid with a really thick layer of irony, a kind of almost knowing, smug sense of cleverness. But there's never any sense of that with Babymetal. Everything is done with total conviction and utter sincerity. I think that's why it works so well. They can do all of these different things because they really mean it. They're not taking the piss out of it. They really believe in what they're doing. And I love that. So yeah, the way Babymetal have created this incredible hybrid form, taking all these different elements from Western popular culture and smashing them together in unpredictable ways, and then combining them with these elements of Japanese tradition to create something completely unique. That's pretty remarkable, but at the same time, I do feel like there have been a bunch of different Japanese acts over the years who have, in a way, taken a similar approach, albeit one that creates completely different results. I mean, several of my favourite Japanese acts, you could say, in a way, do also do this thing of plundering from different styles of Western pop, combining them in unexpected ways, and then creating from that something that's uniquely Japanese, like Otoboke Beaver, who are one of my current favourite bands. It sounds this wild mashup of garage punk and hardcore, jazz, bits of post-punk, and whatever else they feel like smacking together into this breakneck, deranged hybrid. Or look at bands like Maximum the Hormone, who have these utterly unexpected genre shifts that occur multiple times within a really short song. Again, just to create something totally unexpected and uniquely Japanese. But I'd also say it's not just the most contemporary Japanese artists who've taken this approach. I think they've just taken it further and done a more extreme version. But I would argue that going back to the city pop style of the 1970s and 80s, you can see similar processes at work, albeit in a much more low-key and much less extreme manner. City pop's a really interesting thing to me. I hadn't heard of it at all until a couple of years ago, I must admit. But I follow a few different producers of various styles of music on YouTube. There's loads of people doing interesting stuff. And a few years ago, I started to see a few folk working in electronic music referencing this style of music called city pop and incorporating elements of it into what they were doing. And I had no idea what it was, but it sounded really interesting. So just started looking up little bits about it. It sounded pretty fascinating. And ever since then, I've just been dabbling a little bit here and there in it, listening to playlists and trying to get a bit of an idea of what it's all about. It's a style that kind of emerges from the more general Japanese pop scene in the 1970s and really hitting a heyday, I guess, in the 1980s, combining quite a few seemingly disparate elements of popular styles at the time into a new genre that reflected Japan's growing sense of modernity and confidence at the time. It's music designed for urban life, it's embracing new technology, it's upbeat, it's strongly Western influenced, but at the same time still reflects Japanese culture too. So taking elements of jazz fusion, funk, bits of disco, bits of soul, bits of kind of Latin influence, kind of tropical stuff, bits of electropop, all kinds of contemporary music put together into this style that was accessible and smooth and slick, but quite musically ambitious too. You can definitely make parallels between the city pop scene in Japan and the yacht rock scene that was emerging in the States at the same time. Again, that was a scene that incorporated a lot of similar elements, jazz and soul and funk, into this kind of smooth, very accessible blend that suggested a kind of modern aspirational lifestyle in a way. But I don't think they're exactly equivalent for a couple of reasons. Firstly, I think yacht rock, as we understand it, although it does contain a lot of those similar elements to a lot of the city pop stuff, I feel like it's less specifically urban. There can sometimes be a bit more of a pastoral vibe to it. Some of it grew out of that early 70s Laurel Canyon singer-songwriter scene, so a bit more of a laid-back pastoral feel, whereas city pop does tend to be really focused on urban sounds, maybe closer to the Steely Dan, sophisticated jazzy end of the yacht rock thing. I think more significantly, the thing that, in my experience at least, differentiates city pop to some extent from yacht rock would be the city pop that I've listened to. Although it's very musicianally obviously put together by highly accomplished professionals, it does seem to have a quite genuine and sincere quality to it. There's a sort of underlying wistfulness to a lot of even the most upbeat stuff that seems quite hard on sleeve, whereas so much of the yacht rock stuff, even though it can be quite soulful, also feels like there's a certain degree of irony or cynicism to it. It's possible that this is just my personal prejudices coming into play. Maybe not knowing the cultural context, I'm not hearing any cynicism in city pop, but it might be there. Whereas with my personal feelings about some of these yacht rockers, maybe I'm just hearing cynicism where it isn't. But, you know, there's a lot of feeling in a Doobie Brothers song or a Hall & Oates song, but there's still a bit of a feeling of this being the product of someone who's sitting in a Laurel Canyon mansion counting their giant pile of money and enjoying their giant pile of cocaine. It doesn't necessarily feel particularly sincere. And as with Babymetal, it's that sincerity that really does draw me to the bits of city pop that I've particularly enjoyed. There's a particular style of melodicism that you hear in city pop, which I think is also common to quite a lot of other Japanese popular music that you don't necessarily hear so much in Western pop. And part of it might be the distant influence of more traditional Japanese song forms, going back to folk songs and enka singing, that kind of thing. But I think also part of it might be partly to do with Japan's greater and longer lasting reverence for jazz and the standards, the jazz songbook, if you will. Because I feel like almost from the birth of rock and roll in the West, a lot of popular music has pushed that kind of songwriting aside to a greater extent, both for better and for worse. I mean, when we got rid of the crooners and the Great American Songbook, we ushered in an awful lot of really exciting music too. And obviously there were Western pop songwriters who did maintain a reverence for those Great American Songbook writers, your Brian Wilsons, your Paul McCartneys, and still kind of carried elements of that forward in their writing. But I think to a large extent Western pop did move past that and into other areas, whereas I think the popularity of jazz flowered later in Japan, and I think its influence has held sway for a lot longer. And I think that's really affected the way a lot of Japanese songwriters write. You hear a greater level of harmonic and melodic sophistication in, say, like Japanese girl group writing than you do in Western girl group writing, I think. And you particularly hear that kind of melodic and harmonic sophistication in city pop because it's a particularly jazz-influenced genre. A lot of the people playing and writing city pop were people who came from this kind of jazz fusion background. So although they were writing accessible stuff, you do hear quite involved, complex chord progressions going on, some really sophisticated melodies, and quite often some pretty sophisticated playing too. They'll work in some nice little jazzy solos into these very accessible pop songs too. So that definitely comes into play in city pop, but I think it's also in play in Babymetal, you know, as well. And taking this week's song, Akatsuki, as an example, that song in its original version is basically a speed metal song, huge kind of pounding heavy riff, dull kick drums, but you hear the Akatsuki unfinished version, as they call it, the piano version that they did for Sue Metal's 16th birthday, where they strip away the electric instruments, it's just piano and strings, and it completely transforms the song, but it's still the same essential melody and harmony. And I think that's a song that you could take and put into multiple styles, and it would work. I mean, you put an orchestral backing on that, and you could give it to Ella Fitzgerald to sing, you know. So yeah, although at a cursory listen, Babymetal have practically nothing in common with city pop artists like Kingo Hamada or Teiko Onuki, which I probably just pronounced wrong, I think in terms of producing music that combines seemingly potentially disparate elements of Western pop, blends them together with a uniquely Japanese sense of melody and uniquely Japanese sensibilities to create a unique style, I think maybe they do actually have a little bit more in common than you'd initially think. And that takes me to this week's alternative universe scenarios. This alternative timeline, it's a universe not unlike our own, except for the fact that all of the members of Babymetal were born 35 years earlier. So we're back in the early 80s, and Kingo Hamada, who is one of the city pop acts who I particularly enjoyed listening to, he's on a bit of a career high. He's just released his Midnight Cruising album, which is the most 80s title for an album ever. I love it. That's been a roaring success, so he's kind of at the top of the city pop game, but he starts to feel like he might want to just branch out. He's been writing a lot of songs. Some of them don't really suit his voice, and he starts to think, well, maybe I could branch out into songwriting for other artists. Maybe some of these songs would suit a female voice. So he approaches his record label with the suggestion that maybe he could put together a girl group to sing some of these spare songs that he's got, and they like the idea. You know, he's been a good asset for them, and it's another way to take advantage of his talent. So he sets up auditions, and in short order he's recruited Suzuka Nakamoto, Yui Mizuno, and Moro Kikuchi to be his girl group, and he christens them Babymetal, the name coming from one of the most used words in Western pop, because obviously there's a big Western pop influence in city pop, so he wants to sort of hint at that Western influence, and metal, which is the material that's being used to create these new futuristic cityscapes that the music represents. So Babymetal they are, and they make their debut with the song Akatsuki, which is this hauntingly melancholic but also kind of upbeat bop, and that goes down a storm and places them in the forefront of the city pop movement, where they remain for several years, having success throughout the 80s through ups and downs, managed to carry on smoothly when Yui Mizuno sadly has to leave due to ill health, and eventually she's replaced by Momoko Okazaki. But then towards the end of the decade, the popularity of city pop starts to wane, and the girls have started to get their own ideas about music, and they've noticed that metal bands are getting more popular. They started to hear the likes of X Japan, Loudness at the vanguard of the Japanese metal scene, and they start to think maybe this scene's a little bit more exciting than city pop, and Kingo Hamada isn't interested in that at all, so they split off from him and start off in their own direction, combining the smooth pop stylings that they've developed with him with this new metal sound to create a new genre heading into the 1990s. But yeah, in trying to turn Akatsuki into this initial Babymetal city pop sound, as usual, my first step is just getting an isolated vocal and trying to sync it up to the grid. The first time I've ever had to use a vocal from a live performance, and it's the one performance that Sue ever did of Akatsuki unfinished. So separated out that vocal, got it synced up to the grid in GarageBand, tried to EQ it as best I could to make up for the loss of sound quality you get from the stem splitter, but still got a couple of patchy bits. And then next step was putting on some drums and bass. Drums I kept fairly simple. I wanted to give the impression of the drummer being a jazz fusion guy who can really play but who's keeping things simple to make it nice and commercial. So mostly pretty laid back and low key, but then just a couple of tasty little fills. Bass wise, again, I didn't want to go too elaborate. Also, I'm not very good at playing jazz funk kind of bass, so I didn't want to try anything too ambitious and make a mess of it. I'd rejigged the harmony of the song, not completely because the original harmony is beautiful. I didn't want to totally mess it up, but just wanted to slightly tweak things to make them a little bit more jazzy. So worked out a new chord structure and then just followed that fairly closely with the bass. A little bit of slapping and popping, but nothing too showy. Guitar-wise, it's not a very guitar-heavy sounding recording. City pop isn't a big guitar genre, but in spite of that, I still somehow managed to conspire to have quite a few guitar tracks on there, just because I had a few different sounds I wanted, so I've got a different track for each sound. Just got the guitar I played everything on. This is my homemade, super cheap, kit-built Telecaster, but it does the job. The first guitar track I put on, quite a lot of chorus and compression, and it's pretty much doing just the 80s thing where you're almost entirely playing a single muted note, so which you'll hear on so many 80s like soul records. So I've got quite a bit of that happening in the chorus section. Then throughout the verses and some of the other bits of the song, I've got a bit more of a kind of standard jazz funk chordal rhythm happening. Again, just a fairly plain, clean sound, a little bit of chorus because we're going for the 80s, but nothing too elaborate. So just filling in the chord structure. Simple strummed chords, lots of major sevenths, just keeping the rhythm going. And then for a different sound, when we go into the instrumental bits, there's like little 8-bar instrumental sections in between verses. I wanted a different sound, so I have another track with an envelope filter on, so just that funk auto wah sound just quacking away in the background. And then because city pop has a heavy kind of jazz fusion influence, I've got a few solos happening in there, and I figured since guitar is actually the only thing I can really play, I'd have at least one guitar solo, so that's another different sound. It's still fairly clean, but a little edge of overdrive and some flanger on there. I'm going for a style that's aiming somewhere between soft rock and a bit of jazz too, and that crops up in one of those breaks, and then again at the end over the fade out. And keyboards wise, I've got quite a few little bits going on. I started off with an electric piano with a bit of a tremolo effect on. That's something I've heard in quite a lot of city pop songs. Really nice kind of shimmery, twinkly electric piano. So I moved that over into one side of the stereo, and then mirroring it on the other side, I've got a similar part but played with more of a Yamaha DX7 doing an impression of electric piano sound. So very glossy, very twinkly 80s polyphonic synth sound. And then, because, you know, we're at the forefront of 80s technology, I wanted to make sure I had some synth leads as well. So I've got a brass synth sound that pops in to play the second of the instrumental breaks, and then fills in with some little fills in between vocal lines and things later on as well. For further jazz and soul feel, I wanted to get some horns in there, because you do hear some great horn sections on some of those city pop records. I used the saxophone to do the first solo, like the introductory solo to the track, and I found that the sax sound works best up in the high alto or soprano sax kind of register, so that's where I put it. Again, going for a nice, really smooth sound, edging towards Kenny G territory, but hopefully not quite getting there. As we go through the song, that's joined by first a trumpet and then a trombone as well, initially playing in unison, but then branching off into slightly more elaborate and dramatic chordal stuff as we get further and further in and the dynamics get louder. Then for the video, that's the bit that I'm really worried about, and I suspect Amuse are going to come for me at some point. Hopefully they haven't, but you might be seeing something different by the time this is up. I don't know. I'm filming this before the music video's gone up. What I started with was the actual performance of Akatsuki Unfinished from, I think it's Legend 1997, the one and only performance of it anyway, just because that's the only one where the film of Sue is going to sync up. If Amuse comes for me, then I might have to recut it and find a fan cam of the regular version of Akatsuki, which would be cool because you get all the dramatic gestures with the cape and everything, but it won't sync up as well. We'll see how we go. So started with that, zoomed in, and I cut away from it quite a lot to try and avoid copyright shenanigans. And then I obviously needed a more city pop adjacent backing band, so for that I found some great concert footage of, I think they're called Cassiopeia or Cassiopeia, I'm not sure how you're pronouncing it. They're a kind of city pop adjacent fusion band, very popular in the 80s. Great players, great stage presence, so I thought they'd be fantastic as the core of my backing band. They don't have a horn section, so I figured I needed some horns there too because I've got them on the track. And I can't remember the name of the band whose horn section I borrowed. It's some Japanese ska orchestra. I'm sorry, I've forgotten their name. Might be the Tokyo Ska Orchestra. But yeah, like cool looking guys, the right kind of lineup of horns, so I've got them intercut to cover the horns as well. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed this one. I hope I haven't upset anyone who's particularly fond of Akatsuki. As I say, I love that song too, so I definitely didn't want to do it a disservice. Hopefully I haven't done it too badly, and hopefully it's managed to make it onto the internet intact. We'll see how we go with that. If you have anything to say about it or you just want to discuss anything, do drop me a comment. I always appreciate that. If you did enjoy it, please like, share, subscribe. All that stuff really helps. If there's anything you'd like me to do in coming weeks and months, any songs or artists or genres you'd like me to take a look at, please do let me know. I appreciate your suggestions immensely. But otherwise, that's all from me for this week. So thanks very much indeed for watching, and I will hope to see you next time.